The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. "Overlord, this is Anvil 6, came the voice, tight with controlled panic. "We have 30 enemy combatants converging on our position. Request immediate air support." The operations center at Kandahar fell silent except for the hum of computers and the soft whisper of air conditioning. Major Cassandra, heiress, Blackthorn lifted her coffee cup to her lips, the steam fogging her aviator glasses as she listened to the transmission from her position near the back wall. The SEALs gathered around the tactical display screen began their familiar ritual of dark humor, a coping mechanism as old as warfare itself. "Guess we're getting the trust fund princess today," muttered Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, his voice carrying just enough volume to reach Cassandra's ears. "Hope Daddy's money bought her some flying lessons." The comment drew a few snickers from the others, men who had never seen her in action, men who only knew the gossip that followed her like a shadow through every military installation she'd ever served on. She had heard it all before. The whispered speculation about how Senator William Blackthorn's billions had paved her way into the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. The suggestions that her distinguished flying cross was purchased rather than earned. The jokes about her call sign, heiress, which they assumed was mockery, but had been given to her by the very first squadron that watched her save a Marine platoon in the hills of Afghanistan, turning what should have been a massacre into a rescue mission that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. Cassandra set down her coffee cup with deliberate calm, the ceramic making no sound against the metal table. Her hands, steady as granite despite the caffeine and adrenaline, began the methodical process of donning her flight gear. She had learned long ago that action spoke louder than words, that the only argument worth making was written in the sky with cannon fire and precision. The mission brief scrolled across her tablet screen, painting a picture of chaos 30 miles northeast of their position. The SEAL team was trapped in a valley, caught between converging enemy forces who had somehow anticipated their movement. Standard extraction protocols had failed. Apache gunships were grounded due to mechanical issues. The only close air support available was one pilot and one aircraft, an aging that had seen more combat missions than most pilots saw in their entire careers. Her aircraft, her mission. "Heiress to operations," she spoke into her headset, her voice betraying none of the storm brewing inside her chest. "I'm ready for immediate launch." The silence that followed her transmission lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for every person in that operations center to realize that their jokes had just become someone else's lifeline. The billionaire's daughter was about to go to war, and for the first time since she had arrived at Kandahar, nobody was laughing. Her boots echoed against the concrete as she walked toward the flight line, where her A-10 waited in the darkness like a sleeping predator. The aircraft maintenance crew had already completed their pre-flight checks, each man moving with the quiet efficiency of professionals who understood that their work meant the difference between life and death for the pilots they served. Staff Sergeant Jenkins handed her the aircraft logbook, his weathered face serious in the red glow of the flight line lighting. "She's ready to go, ma'am," he said, his southern drawl carrying decades of experience working on military aircraft. "All weapons systems green, full fuel load, and I've personally checked every bolt on that GAU-8 cannon. That 30mm is going to sing for you today." The crew chief's confidence was infectious, a reminder that she was not alone in this mission, despite the isolation she often felt among her peers. Cassandra climbed into the cockpit with practiced efficiency, her movements automatic after thousands of hours of flight time in the twin-engine attack aircraft. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was not a beautiful airplane by conventional standards, but to those who understood its purpose, it possessed a savage elegance that few aircraft could match. Built around its massive GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, the aircraft was designed for one purpose: to provide devastating close air support to ground forces in contact with the enemy. The pre-flight checklist flowed through her mind like a prayer, each item verified with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 67 combat missions. Engine start, hydraulic systems, navigation equipment, weapons systems. Every component of the aircraft had to be perfect because there would be no second chances where she was going. The SEAL team had minutes, not hours, before their position would be completely overrun. "Tower, this is Eris with request for immediate takeoff clearance," she transmitted, her voice cutting through the radio chatter with the authority that came from years of combat experience. The air traffic controller's response was immediate, clearing all other air traffic from her departure route. Within minutes, the A-10's twin General Electric TF-34 engines were spooling up to takeoff power, their distinctive whine filling the cockpit with familiar vibration. The aircraft lifted off into the darkness, climbing steadily toward the mountains where 30 American Special Operations soldiers were fighting for their lives. Below, the lights of Kandahar fell away, replaced by the stark landscape of Afghanistan under starlight. Cassandra's hands moved across the instrument panel with unconscious competence, adjusting course and altitude while monitoring the tactical radio frequencies that would connect her to the men she was flying to save. The mission was simple in concept, impossibly complex in execution. Locate the SEAL team, identify the enemy forces threatening them, and eliminate those threats without causing friendly casualties. In the close-quarters combat environment where the team was trapped, the margin for error was measured in feet rather than miles. A single mistake, one misidentified target, could turn a rescue mission into a tragedy that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. As the A-10 raced through the night sky at maximum cruise speed, Cassandra's mind shifted into the combat mindset that had been forged through years of training and tempered by months of actual combat. The jokes and whispers from the operations center faded into background noise, replaced by the focused intensity that came with knowing that lives depended on her skill, her judgment, and her ability to bring devastating firepower to bear with surgical precision. The radio crackled again, this time with the voice of the SEAL team leader, call sign Anvil 6. "Any air support, this is Anvil 6. We are taking heavy casualties and request immediate assistance. Our position is grid reference." The coordinates flowed through the tactical communication system, automatically updating her navigation display with the exact location of the embattled team. They were still 15 minutes away from the target area. 15 minutes that felt like hours to the men fighting for their lives in the valley below. Cassandra adjusted her course slightly, shaving precious seconds off her flight time while running through the tactical options available to her. The A-10's weapons payload included 1,350 rounds of 30mm armor-piercing and high-explosive ammunition for the GAU-8 cannon, along with a full complement of Maverick air-to-surface missiles and unguided rockets. It was enough firepower to level a city block, but in the confined terrain where the SEAL team was trapped, precision would matter more than raw, destructive power. The landscape below began to change as she approached the target area, the relatively flat desert giving way to rocky hills and deep valleys that provided perfect cover for enemy forces. Her radar warning receiver remained quiet, indicating no immediate surface-to-air missile threats, but she knew that could change in seconds. The enemy forces in this region had access to sophisticated weapons systems, including man-portable air defense missiles, that could bring down even the heavily armored A-10 if the pilot became careless or predictable. "Anvil 6, this is Eris inbound to your position," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "ETA 5 minutes. Request immediate tactical situation update and friendly positions." The SEAL team leader's response came immediately, painting a picture of chaos and desperate defensive fighting that was rapidly deteriorating into a life-or-death situation for every American in that valley. The enemy had somehow anticipated the SEAL team's movement and had positioned forces on 3 sides of their defensive position, effectively creating a killing field that was slowly contracting as more hostile fighters moved into the area. Standard extraction procedures were impossible due to the concentration of enemy fire, and the team's ammunition supplies were running dangerously low after hours of sustained combat. They needed close air support, and they needed it immediately. Cassandra began her descent toward the target area, the A-10's engines throttling back as she reduced speed and altitude to begin her attack runs. The aircraft's armor plating, designed to withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft artillery, gave her confidence to operate at low altitude where her weapons would be most effective. Through her night vision equipment, she could see muzzle flashes scattered across the valley floor, a deadly light show that marked the positions of both friendly and enemy forces. The challenge of close air support in this environment was like performing surgery with a sledgehammer. She had to deliver devastating firepower while ensuring that none of it struck the men she was there to protect. The SEAL team's position was marked by infrared strobes visible only through her night vision systems, but the enemy forces were scattered throughout the terrain in positions that required careful identification before engaging. "Eris, Anvil 6, came the urgent transmission from the ground. "We have enemy personnel advancing on our north and west flanks, distance approximately 200 meters and closing. We are running critically low on ammunition." The team leader's voice remained professional despite the desperate nature of their situation, a testament to the training and discipline that defined America's Special Operations Forces. Cassandra rolled the A-10 into a steep bank, bringing the aircraft around to align with the enemy forces moving against the SEAL team's northern flank. Through her targeting systems, she could see the heat signatures of approximately 15 enemy fighters moving through the rocky terrain in a coordinated assault formation. They were too close to the friendly positions for her to use missiles or unguided rockets, which meant this would have to be done with the precision of the GAU-8 cannon. The A-10's cannon was a masterpiece of military engineering, capable of firing 70 rounds per second with accuracy measured in feet rather than yards. Each 30mm round was designed to penetrate armor and destroy vehicles, but against personnel in the open, the effect was absolutely devastating. The key to successful close air support was placing that firepower exactly where it was needed, while avoiding the friendlies who were often only hundreds of feet away from the targets. She lined up her first attack run, the aircraft's nose pointed toward the advancing enemy forces, while her targeting systems painted laser designations on the ground below. The SEAL team's infrared strobes showed clearly on her display, confirming their position and giving her the reference points she needed to avoid hitting friendly forces. Everything depended on precision, timing, and the ability to make split-second decisions while flying at high speed in a combat environment. "Anvil 6, Eris is inbound hot on your northern flank," she transmitted, giving the ground forces warning of her impending attack. "Keep your heads down and mark your positions." The team leader's acknowledgement was brief and professional, confirming that his men were as low as possible and ready for the close air support that might save their lives. The A-10 dove toward the valley floor at a steep angle, airspeed building as gravity and engine power combined to accelerate the aircraft toward its targets. Cassandra's finger found the cannon trigger, her training and experience converging into the moment when theory became reality and firepower became salvation for the men trapped below. The crosshairs in her heads-up display settled on the lead elements of the enemy formation, and she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with a sound like tearing canvas, amplified 1,000 times, the aircraft shuddering as 70 rounds per second poured from the weapons system, built into the A-10's nose. Bright flashes lit up the ground as 30mm rounds impacted among the enemy forces, each explosion creating a brief star of destruction that eliminated threats and shattered the enemy's coordinated advance. She held the trigger for exactly 2 seconds, sending 140 rounds downrange with the precision of a sniper rifle, despite the massive volume of fire. The effect on the enemy formation was immediate and catastrophic. The coordinated advance dissolved into chaos as survivors scrambled for cover among the rocks. Through her night vision systems, she could see that at least half of the enemy fighters in the northern group had been eliminated, with the survivors falling back in disarray. Good hit," came the excited voice from the ground. "Enemy forces on the north are withdrawing. We need immediate attention on the western approach. They're massing for an assault." Cassandra was already banking the aircraft around for her next attack run, though responding to her control inputs with the steady reliability that had made it legendary among ground forces throughout its decades of service. The western approach to the SEAL team's position was more challenging, with enemy forces scattered among rocky outcroppings that provided natural cover from air attack. She would need to make multiple passes to eliminate the threat, each one bringing the aircraft within range of small arms fire and possible surface-to-air missiles. The A-10's armor could withstand significant battle damage, but every pass increased the risk of catastrophic failure. As she lined up for her second attack run, Cassandra's mind flashed back to the laughter in the operations center, to the jokes about trust fund princesses and purchase decorations. The men on the ground didn't care about her father's money or her family's political connections. All that mattered to them was her ability to deliver precise, devastating firepower when their lives hung in the balance. This was where reputation was earned, one trigger pull at a time. The second attack run was even more precise than the first, her cannon fire walking through the enemy positions with methodical accuracy. Each burst was carefully controlled, designed to eliminate threats while minimizing collateral damage to the rocky terrain that provided the only cover available to both friendly and enemy forces. The A-10 systems were performing flawlessly, giving her the tools she needed to conduct surgical strikes in an environment where precision meant everything. "Western approach is clear," reported the SEAL team leader, his voice carrying a note of relief for the first time since the engagement began. "We have movement on the southern ridge. Looks like they're trying to get elevation advantage for a final assault." The enemy forces were adapting to the air attack, moving to positions where they hoped to gain tactical advantage despite the presence of close air support overhead. Cassandra pulled the A-10 into a climbing turn, gaining altitude to assess the overall tactical situation while planning her next attack. The southern ridge was a natural strong point that would allow enemy forces to fire down into the SEAL team's position with devastating effect. She had to eliminate that threat before the enemy could establish firing positions on the high ground, but the ridge was also close to a small village that intelligence reports had identified as containing civilian population. The rules of engagement were clear: no strikes within 500 meters of known civilian areas without explicit authorization from higher command. But the enemy forces were using that restriction to their advantage, positioning themselves where they knew American pilots would be reluctant to engage. It was a tactical chess game played with real lives, where every decision had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate battle. "Overlord, this is Eris," she transmitted to the operations center. "I have enemy forces moving to elevated positions within 400 meters of civilian structures. Request authorization for engagement." The response would take precious seconds, time that the enemy could use to complete their movement and gain the tactical advantage that might doom the SEAL team below. While waiting for authorization, Cassandra continued to circle the battlefield, her trained eyes analyzing every aspect of the tactical situation. The SEAL team had held their position against overwhelming odds for over 2 hours, but their ammunition was nearly exhausted, and their defensive perimeter was contracting under constant pressure. Without immediate air support to eliminate the threat on the southern ridge, their position would become untenable within minutes. The authorization came through with bureaucratic efficiency that contrasted sharply with the life-and-death urgency of the situation. "Eris, you are cleared to engage targets on the southern ridge, minimize collateral damage, and avoid civilian casualties." The words were clinical, professional, but they carried the weight of command authority that allowed her to do what was necessary to save American lives. She rolled the A-10 into another attack dive, this time approaching from the east to minimize the risk of stray rounds impacting the village. The enemy forces on the ridge were clearly visible through her targeting systems, approximately 20 fighters who had positioned themselves among the rocks with clear fields of fire down into the valley where the SEAL team was trapped. They had to be eliminated, but the proximity to civilian areas required absolute precision. The cannon run was her most careful yet, each burst precisely controlled to impact only the immediate target area. The 30mm rounds carved through the enemy positions with devastating effect, the high-explosive warheads creating bright flashes against the rocky ridge line. Within seconds, the coordinated enemy assault had been shattered, with survivors scrambling away from their elevated positions in desperate retreat. "All enemy forces are withdrawing," came the report from the ground. "We have visual confirmation of multiple enemy KIA, and the remainder are fleeing the area. Outstanding work up there." The relief in the SEAL team leader's voice was unmistakable, the sound of men who had been facing certain death and had been given a reprieve by precision firepower delivered at exactly the right moment. But the mission was not over. Extraction of the SEAL team would require careful coordination between air and ground assets, with continued air cover to ensure that enemy forces did not regroup and attack during the vulnerable extraction process. Cassandra began orbiting the area at a higher altitude, conserving fuel while maintaining overwatch for the rescue helicopters that were already inbound to the area. The extraction took 45 minutes to complete, with two CH-47 Chinook helicopters moving the entire SEAL team to a secure landing zone, while Cassandra provided continuous air cover overhead. Her presence alone was enough to deter any enemy forces from interfering with the operation, the distinctive sound of the A-10's engine serving as an audible reminder that American air power was on station and ready to engage any threats. As the last helicopter disappeared into the darkness with its precious cargo of American Special Operations soldiers, Cassandra turned the A-10 back toward Kandahar. The mission had been a complete success, 30 American lives saved, enemy forces eliminated, and no civilian casualties despite the challenging tactical environment. It was the kind of mission that defined careers and created legends, but she knew that the real measure of success was simpler. Everyone was going home alive. The flight back to base gave her time to reflect on the events of the past few hours, the transformation from mockery to respect that she had witnessed so many times before. The SEALs who had laughed at the trust fund princess would never forget the sound of her A-10's cannon fire eliminating the enemies who had been seconds away from overrunning their position. Actions, not words, had written her reputation in the sky above Afghanistan. Landing at Kandahar in the pre-dawn darkness, Cassandra completed her post-flight procedures with the same methodical precision she brought to every aspect of her military service. The aircraft had performed flawlessly, absorbing several small arms hits without any significant damage to critical systems. The maintenance crew would have the A-10 ready for another mission within hours, a testament to both the aircraft's design and the skill of the men who kept it flying. The operations center was buzzing with activity when she returned for her mission debrief, but the atmosphere had changed completely from the pre-flight briefing hours earlier. The same SEALs who had joked about her family connections now looked at her with the respect reserved for warriors who had proven themselves in combat. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez approached her with a cup of coffee and an expression that mixed embarrassment with genuine admiration. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice lacking any trace of the casual disrespect she had endured earlier. "What you did out there, that was some of the finest close air support I've ever seen. You saved a lot of good men today, and we won't forget it." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of hard-earned respect from men who had seen the worst that war could offer and recognized exceptional skill when they witnessed it. The debrief was thorough and professional, with every aspect of the mission analyzed for lessons learned and tactical improvements. The precision of her cannon fire, the coordination with ground forces, the adherence to rules of engagement in a complex environment. All of it was documented and studied by officers who understood that such missions were textbook examples of how close air support should be conducted. But beyond the official reports and tactical analysis, something more important had occurred in that valley. The legend of Eris had been written not in gossip or speculation, but in the saved lives of American warriors who had faced impossible odds and survived because one pilot had the skill and courage to deliver devastating firepower with surgical precision. As the sun rose over Kandahar, painting the Afghan landscape in shades of gold and amber, Major Cassandra Blackthorne finally allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had proven once again that reputation in combat was not inherited or purchased, but earned through competence, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for the men and women who served beside her. The SEALs would never laugh at the billionaire's daughter again. The story of that night would spread through the military community with the speed of wildfire, growing in scope and detail with each telling. But the core truth would remain unchanged. When American lives hung in the balance, when the odds seemed impossible and hope seemed lost, the sound of an A-10's engines and the devastating accuracy of its cannon fire had turned certain defeat into miraculous victory. Years later, when military historians studied the close air support missions that defined the war in Afghanistan, this engagement would be cited as a perfect example of precision, professionalism, and the warrior spirit that made American military aviation legendary around the world. But for the 30 men who lived to see another sunrise because of her actions, Cassandra Eris Blackthorne would always be remembered as the pilot who proved that true courage cannot be inherited, only demonstrated when everything is on the line. The mission was over, but the legend had just begun. In the unforgiving skies above Afghanistan, where reputation was measured in saved lives and successful missions, Major Cassandra Blackthorne had written her name in history with cannon fire and precision flying. The SEALs who had once laughed at her would spend the rest of their careers telling anyone who would listen about the day the billionaire's daughter saved their lives with an A-10 that roared in low and firing. The morning briefings would include her actions as a case study in effective close air support. Training manuals would reference her tactics as examples of how to conduct precision strikes in complex environments. Awards and commendations would follow, adding official recognition to achievements that had already been validated by the most important judges of all, the men whose lives she had saved. But in her quarters that morning, as she finally found time to write letters to her family, Cassandra reflected not on glory or recognition, but on the responsibility that came with her skills and training. Every mission was an opportunity to prove that trust was never misplaced, that the faith placed in her by commanders and comrades was justified by results measured in lives saved and missions accomplished. The A-10 Thunderbolt II would continue to serve as her weapon of choice, its unglamorous but deadly effectiveness matching perfectly with her own approach to military service. Neither she nor her aircraft were designed to win beauty contests or impress crowds at air shows. They existed for one purpose: to provide devastating, accurate firepower when American lives depended on it, regardless of the personal cost or public recognition. The jokes and whispers would continue at other bases, in other operation centers, wherever people who had never seen her fly gathered to speculate about the billionaire's daughter who claimed to be a warrior pilot. But now there would be other voices in those conversations, voices of men who had been there, who had seen the A-10 roar in low and firing with precision that bordered on artistry, who knew the difference between reputation and reality. The war in Afghanistan would continue for years to come, bringing countless opportunities for pilots to prove their worth in the unforgiving environment of combat aviation. Some would rise to legendary status through exceptional skill and courage. Others would be forgotten despite competent service. But for Major Cassandra Eris Blackthorne, the foundation of her legend had been laid in a single night when 30 American lives hung in the balance, and her A-10 became the instrument of their salvation. The final entry in her logbook that morning was simple and professional. Combat mission successful. All friendly forces extracted safely. Aircraft status. Mission capable. But those clinical words could not capture the transformation that had occurred in the hearts and minds of everyone who witnessed her performance. The trust fund princess had become a warrior, the jokes had become respect, and the legend of the heiress had been written in the eternal language of courage under fire. As she finally allowed herself to rest, Cassandra knew that tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that excellence in military aviation was not about family connections or financial resources, but about skill, dedication, and the willingness to risk everything for the mission and the men who depended on her. The A-10 would be ready, her crew would be ready, and she would be ready to answer the call whenever American lives hung in the balance and precision firepower was needed to tip the scales of battle. The legend of the heiress would continue to grow with each successful mission, each life saved, each impossible situation resolved through superior flying and accurate gunnery. But its foundation would always be that night in Afghanistan when the SEALs stopped laughing and started believing, when the sound of an A-10's cannon fire became the most beautiful music in the world to 30 men who thought they were going to die in a valley far from home. The billionaire's daughter had become something more than her critics ever imagined, and something different from what her supporters had hoped. She had become exactly what the United States Air Force needed. A pilot who could deliver devastating firepower with surgical precision, who could make life-and-death decisions in split seconds, and who understood that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to function effectively despite it. The legend of Eris had been written in cannon fire and would be remembered as long as warriors gathered to tell stories of battles won against impossible odds.